The question already told you how many answers it wanted, and you still got it wrong. That's the whole shape of a multiple response item, and it's the most avoidable point loss on the entire exam. And there's a scoring detail behind it that makes a nearly right answer worth exactly the same as a blank one.
Hey everyone, Erica here. A multiple response question offers several answer choices where more than one is correct. That's straight from the outline, and it runs on every delivery mode, so nobody dodges these.
We've spent this series on what the exam tests. This block is about how it asks, and this format punishes a reading habit that every other question rewards.
This is Kai. The habit is hunting for the best answer on a single response item that's exactly right. Here it's fatal because there's no best. There are two correct ones and you need both.
And people do find one of the two. They find a genuinely correct option, feel the click of recognition, select it, and move on satisfied.
Satisfied and wrong, Erica, which is the worst combination available.
And it compounds with something we covered earlier in this block. The outline says pretest questions are randomly placed throughout the exam, 10 of them unmarked.
So one of your all or nothing items might not count at all, and you'll never know which. Which is another argument for treating every one of them as leave rather than triaging by how hard they feel.
So the first discipline is almost insultingly simple. Read the stem, find the number, say it to yourself, and only then look at the options.
2, 3, whatever it says. Hold that number in your head as a target, because the moment you start reading options, you'll start hunting for the single best one out of habit. And there's a second reason these matter more than their count suggests. The outline says a case or scenario hands you a series of questions off one situation, and nothing stops several of those from being multiple response.
So a single case block could carry 2 or 3 all or nothing items in a row in the portion of the exam that locks behind you at the first break.
Which is the compounding version of this problem, and it's the reason we put the case episode before this one.
Jasmine has been fielding a version of this all week, and it's the question underneath the whole episode.
It's not really about reading at all. Why does finding one right answer out of 2 score nothing? So that's the format. More than one correct answer, a stem that tells you how many, and a reading habit built for a different question type entirely. Quick honest ask while we are here. If this has been worth your time so far, hit like, then subscribe and ring the bell. I know everyone asks, but this one is free, and it is how a small channel like this actually grows. I promised a scoring detail, and this is the one. It's published, it's 1 sentence long, and almost nobody has read it.
1 point. That's the sentence.
Professor Duran is at the desk for this.
Nearly, though the precise wording matters here. Each scored question on the exam is worth 1 point, and the final score is calculated by totaling the points earned. Notice what that says about a question, not about an option.
So the unit of scoring is the question, not the answer, not the option.
Correct. And therefore, a multiple response item asking for 2 answers is still a single question worth a single point. There's no arithmetic in the published scoring by which half of it could be worth half a point.
Which is the answer to Jasmine's question. 1 of 2 right scores nothing because the question is the unit and you didn't answer the question. You answered part of it.
And I want to be careful here, because this is where people overstate things. PMI doesn't publish a sentence that says the words "no partial credit."
It does not, and you are right to say so. What it publishes is the 1 point per question rule, from which the consequence follows. That's a stronger position than a rumor, and an honest one to hold.
So the working assumption is all or nothing per item, and the reason to trust it's arithmetic rather than folklore.
Which changes how you spend time on one. A multiple response item is worth the same single point as the easiest question on the paper.
And that's the strategic reading most candidates miss entirely. They spend 4 minutes on a 2-answer item because it feels heavier. It is not heavier. It's 1 point that happens to be harder to earn.
So don't let it eat the time of 3 easier points elsewhere. There's one more thing the published scoring tells you, and it's quietly reassuring. The report says the number of questions you answer correctly places you in a performance rating category.
which confirms the counting is of questions, again, not of options, not of weighted difficulty. A hard 2-answer item and an easy 1-answer item are the same single tally mark.
So there's no hidden bonus for surviving the harder format. Worth knowing before you decide to fight one for 5 minutes.
Professor Duran, thank you. The unit of scoring is the question, not the option, is the sentence I will be repeating.
1 question, 1 point, however many boxes it wants.
There are 4 distinct ways to lose a multiple response item, and it's worth separating them because 3 of the 4 aren't knowledge failures at all.
Which should be encouraging. 3 of your 4 failure modes are fixable this afternoon without learning anything new.
Number 1 is stopping at the first correct option. You find a good answer, the recognition feels like completion, and you commit.
Erica, this is the commonest by a distance because the feeling of finding a right answer is genuinely satisfying. Satisfaction is the bug.
Number 2 runs the other way, you overselect. It asked for 2 and you gave it 3 because the third looked defensible and you wanted insurance.
Kai, there is no insurance. An extra selection isn't a hedge, it's a wrong answer attached to your right ones.
Number 3 is subtler, and it catches strong candidates. You pick 2 options that are actually the same action described twice.
Update the risk register and document the new exposure in the risk register. 2 lines, 1 action. If your 2 picks collapse into 1 move, one of them is
a distractor built out of your own answer. Yes.
Exactly. Good multiple response items want 2 different kinds of move, not the same move twice. If both your picks live in the same artifact, look again.
So which of the 4 is actually costing you points? Number 4 is the only one that's genuinely about knowing the material. You pick the 2 most appealing options rather than the 2 the question asked for.
Appealing meaning decisive, energetic, the thing a good manager would obviously do. Work the weekend, push the vendor, escalate.
All of which feel like leadership and none of which are what the tasks describe. This is where the exam and instinct part company, and it's the one failure mode you fix with study rather than with technique.
There's a 5th thing worth naming, though it's a variant of the first rather than its own failure. Some stems don't give you a number at all. They say select all that apply.
Which removes your target entirely, and that's genuinely harder. Now you can't count against anything, so the only defense is judging each option independently on its own merits.
1 at a time, in or out, no comparing them against each other. Because with no number, there's no field to narrow. And before we get to a worked one, notice that 3 of those 4 cost you nothing to fix. That ratio is the good news in this episode. Let's work 1. R's, written for teaching, never an exam item, and deliberately built so all 4 failure modes have somewhere to bite.
And read it the way we said. Number first, then options.
Professor Duran, take us through it.
The situation is simple. An integration test window has slipped 3 weeks following a vendor release. The sponsor has asked for options at Friday's steering committee. The STEM asks which 2 actions you should take first.
2. Professor Duran. Say it before you look.
The options are these. Update the risk register with the schedule exposure. Ask the vendor to skip regression testing to recover the time. Run the slip through the change control process. Instruct the team to work the weekend. Escalate to the sponsor's manager.
And 2 of those 5 feel like leadership, which is exactly the point of including them.
Skipping regression buys 3 weeks by trading quality for schedule without anybody agreeing to it. That's not a decision you own.
And the weekend instruction spends the team's capacity before any analysis has established that 3 weeks even matters. You haven't consulted the baseline yet.
Escalating to the sponsor's manager is the strangest one, and people still choose it. The sponsor asked you for options. Going over their head answers a question nobody posed.
Which leaves the 2 that are correct. And notice they're different kinds of move rather than the same move twice.
One records the exposure so the organization can see it. The other routes the change through the body that exists to decide it. An artifact action and a governance action. They don't collapse into each other.
And that pairing is the tell. When a pick 2 is well written, the 2 right answers usually sit in different domains.
which is a genuinely useful heuristic and not a rule, so hold it loosely. But if both your picks are the same flavor of action, that's a prompt to look again.
And notice which domains those two correct answers sat in because it maps onto the weighting. The risk register action is process. Routing it through the change body is business environment.
Which isn't a coincidence. Process carries 41% of the exam and business environment 26%, so an item that touches both is efficient for the examiner. The formats exist to test more per question, not to be cruel.
That reframe helps, actually. It's not a trap designed to catch you. It's a question designed to cover ground.
Professor Duran, thank you. The artifact action plus governance action pairing is the thing I'd want on a card.
Two right answers rarely do the same job. Look for the second job.
So the technique, and it's 2 passes rather than 1, which is the whole trick.
Pass 1 is generous. Find the number in the stem, then go through every option and mark anything that could be defensible. Don't judge yet, collect.
Which might give you 4 candidates for a pick 2, and that is fine. Pass 1 isn't supposed to be decisive.
Pass 2 is where you cut. Now you're comparing your candidates against each other rather than against the question, and you're cutting down to exactly the number the stem asked for.
And in Pass 2 you run 2 checks. Do any of my picks say the same thing as another? And are these the 2 the question asked for, or the 2 I found most appealing?
Then physically count your selections against the number in the stem before you leave the item. It takes 3 seconds, and it catches the over-select every time.
And keep the time discipline in view. 2 passes on a multiple response item is fast because Pass 1 is collection and Pass 2 is comparison. What is slow is 1 indecisive pass where you argue with yourself about each option in turn.
Picture Priya Raghavan, a delivery manager with 6 years on payments platforms, who tracked her own practice misses for a fortnight. 19 of her wrong answers were multiple response items. 14 of those 19 were over-selection.
Erica, roughly 3/4 of her losses on this format came from one habit, and it was the habit of hedging.
Kay is right, and she fixed it with a counting rule and no additional study. That's the whole argument for treating this as technique first.
One more thing on time, because the arithmetic is worth saying out loud. 240 minutes across 180 questions averages about 80 seconds each.
So a pick 2 that takes you 3 minutes has borrowed the time of 2 other questions. If it earns the point, that trade was fine. If you over-select anyway, you paid 3 times for nothing.
Which is the sharpest reason to run the counting check. It costs 3 seconds and it protects the 3 minutes you already spent. One honest caveat though, because there's a real limit here. Technique won't save you on failure mode 4. If you don't know that escalating past the person who asked you is wrong, no counting rule rescues that.
So who should drill technique and who should drill content? If your misses are over-selection and stopping early, drill technique. If they're picking the decisive-sounding option, go back to the tasks.
And you find out which by tracking them for 2 weeks like Priya did, rather than guessing.
If one thing survives today, make it this. The unit of scoring is the question, so a multiple response item is all or nothing, and most of what you lose on its habit rather than ignorance.
Jasmine, count your boxes. It's free.
If you have been quietly losing points to this format without knowing why, subscribing keeps the rest of the technique block coming as we build it, and it costs you nothing. So tell me before you go. When you miss a pick 2, is it over-selecting or stopping early? Go count some boxes. This is Jasmine, and I will see you in the next one.